This is that direct instruction part where I just tell you what the words mean. But sometimes this helps because sometimes the definition that you wrote down in the dictionary still doesn't make sense to you. So we're going to start off with this one. And somebody said to me yesterday, oh my God, we've had this on every vocabulary packet. Oh my! What do you think that means? Yeah, it probably means it matters. So there are 4 things that have to be true for natural selection to work. And this is the primary mechanism that we see evolution occur via in nature. This is the big one. The first thing that has to be true is there has to be variation. Populations have to have variation, and they do. Look around. Oh my goodness. There's plenty of variation in all populations, in all species, and that's a wonderful thing. It's not, variation isn't just okay, it's really important. There have to be challenges to survival. Remember, life is tough. And because life is tough, many die. Oh, that hurts my throat. Not everybody makes it. More individuals are born than survive. The ones that do survive are the ones who have some kind of advantage, and they pass those advantages on to their offspring. So natural selection, by now, you know, you've got it. But we've introduced now in this matrix 2 other kinds of selection. So the first one is artificial selection, and a lot of people said artificial means fake. Well, not really. In this case, artificial selection just means where in natural selection, the environment is making the selection, the environment is providing the challenge, the environment decides who lives and who dies. In artificial selection, humans decide. This is when humans step in and take the place of nature. So let's take a look. How do you like them apples? That's a lot of apples. Who here has eaten an apple? I have 2 in my lunch today. They're both Brayburns. Are there different kinds of apples? Yeah, of course there are. Don't be ridiculous, Moser. Gosh. So yeah, and they have different characteristics and different colors and different textures and different flavors. Some are crunchy and some are soft and some cook down and some don't. So all these varieties of apples, where did they come from? We talked about this a little bit in the last matrix in one of the recitations. All domestic species come from a wild ancestor species. What do wild apples look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. Oh, yes, you did. You just didn't know it. So, hard, nubby very often, kind of mealy. Who here has eaten a crab apple? Yes. Was it an experience worth repeating? No, they're disgusting. Were you told not to eat it as a child? I was. Did I listen? Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. Why would I do that? So yeah, they're not very sweet. They're kind of like mealy and crunchy and icky, and I ate them anyway. The wild apples that our domestic apples are descended from are actually different than crab apples. They're from a region of the world called Kazakhstan that sits between Europe and Asia. And that is the ancestral home of the wild species that gives us the modern apple. And how is it possible to get all these varieties of apple out of one wild species? Because that wild species has got a whole bunch of, what was that first condition for selection to occur? Variation. The wild apples of Kazakhstan are incredibly varied in size and color and texture and shape. Yellow and green and red, and there are some that are darn near black. There are some that have got like nubby, what are called russeted skins, all kinds of different shapes and sizes and flavors. And from that amazing diversity, humans went, ooh, I like this one. And so then you plant something off of that tree. Apples have got amazing diversity. Amazing. Humans picked it. Humans said, I like this one. I'd like to plant more of that. I don't like that one. Let's not plant that one. It's gross. So, what are they? No, seriously, you can't tell. They're chickens. Oh my God, you Fruit Loops. Now you're just messing with me. They're chickens. Who has seen a live chicken? Excellent. Who's got chickens? Excellent. I don't anymore. They come in a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes and colors. Egg-laying habits, muscle growth habits, lots of variation.
What's your favorite kind of chicken?
All have a single wild ancestral species. One wild ancestral, that is the Indonesian jungle fowl. Looks kind of like a chicken. It's the wild ancestral species of all of those modern chicken varieties. And how do you get all of these varieties out of that one species? There's variation in the species. There's genetic variability in the species. How do you select Indonesian? So who here has ever been chased by a pheasant? They're terrifying, quite frankly. A pheasant, it's a wild fowl. They were introduced to this continent, though they're an Asian species originally. And they're fairly fierce. I mean, they're not big, but they will peck you. Now, somewhere in the last 10,000 years, some Indonesian jungle fowl figured out that if they hung around long enough, there'd be scraps. And if they occasionally left an egg near the hut, people didn't mind so much if they ate the scraps. You gonna eat that? No? Okay, I'll eat it. And so gradually, some of these jungle fowl lost their fear of humans, and humans would begin to leave food out intentionally. Well, guess what? The ones who were willing to get close enough to humans to take their food were the ones who were ripe for domestication. This is artificial selection. Who picked which jungle fowl they fed? Humans did. And then once you've got them sort of penned up, oh, you know what? I've got these little jungle fowl who actually are happy to stay in a fence for me, and I get eggs from them every day. It's a really good trade-off. I just give them my scraps. It's perfect. Once you have that going on for a few generations and you start to see variation showing up in your little flock of what used to be wild jungle fowl, and you start picking out the ones that, you know what, I don't want this one to breed. It's mean. I'm going to kill it and eat it. This one's really gentle. We'll let it live. Oh, this one lays more eggs than the rest. We're going to let her hatch out her eggs. This one lays like one a week. She goes to the pot.
What was that?
That's artificial selection. In artificial selection, humans are picking which ones get to breed. So humans are shaping the species. Some of the same rules apply, though. You have to have variation. But in this case, instead of the environment deciding who lives and dies because of challenges to survival, humans decide who lives and dies. Humans pick. Artificial selection. 2 kinds of selection down, 1 to go. We have to ask the eternal question. What do does want? Big racks! As a matter of fact, they want big racks. If you are a buck and you want to be successful, you want to get all the does to look longingly at you and say, I want to have his babies. You gotta have a big rack. Because guess what does think of big racks? They are dead sexy. She looks at that rack, oh, hearts aflutter. That's it. I must have him. Now, so she looks at him. She wants to mate with him because he's got this beautiful rack. So here's the question. Why? Why does the size of his rack matter? Look at that neck. Look at how thick and muscular that neck is. Look at how strong he is. Why does she want to mate with him? She wants to mate with him because her her babies will be strong. She wants to ensure that her genes make it into the next generation. What's the best way to do that?
Get a ripped beard.
You find a buck who is strong, who can survive, who can fight off other bucks. You make babies with him, your babies get his characteristics. They get your characteristics. You got awesome babies. You got winners. You got babies who are going to carry your genes generations down the line. So, here's another example, and this is the one that's the classic. The classic that comes up if you type sexual selection into Google and you do an image search, what are you going to get? You're going to get this. Peacock. This is a male peafowl. The females are peahens, the males are peacocks, and the males are distinguished by their amazing tail display. Because females look at that tail, and again, they're like, oh my God, I must mate with him. He is the peafowl for me. Because look at that beautiful tail. It's a display. Now, is there any kind of survival advantage to that tail? Heck no. As a matter of fact, let's look at, well, let's think about this. I mean, these are a fowl species. They're just foul. They're a prey species, just like a lot of other little birds. If you've ever had chickens who've been preyed on by, anything from raccoons to weasels to hawks, fowl are prone to being preyed on by predator species. Do you think that this tail might slow him down or be a neon sign saying, I'm right here, woohoo, look at me? Yeah, this tail's like a neon sign advertising his location. He is not camouflaged in any way, shape, or form when the tail's extended. Even when the tail is closed up, I want you to imagine for a moment trying to take flight with that dragon behind you. That's a challenge. This is actually an impediment to his survival. This makes it tougher for him to survive. So sexual selection here is working against survival. It's working against natural selection. She may think it's sexy, but it might just get him killed. So there's a balancing act. Could there be any disadvantage to, again, what do does want? Big racks. Could there be a disadvantage to a huge rack?
Yeah.
Yes, I want you to meet. They called him the Michigan Monarch. And I forget what year he was killed. But it's a record-holding rack. It's huge. It's a big rack. But, yeah, I don't even know how many points that is. I want you to imagine for a second the amount of neck muscle it takes to hold that up, number one. I also want to ask you something. Do bucks keep their racks for life? Do they have to grow that thing once?
No.
No, they grow it every year. Every bit of body that you grow requires energy. That requires calories. You want to grow a big, beautiful tail? That's going to cost you energy. That's going to cost you calories. You want to grow an enormous rack? That's going to cost you energy. That's going to cost you calories. That's more food that you have to find and take in. That's more time that you have to spend grazing and susceptible to predators. So you've got to grow all that big, giant muscle to hold that heavy rack up. You have to take in all the calories to grow that heavy rack. And this is the thing nobody ever talks about, but I always think, so I'm not the world's most graceful runner. I'm going to be completely honest. Who here has run through woods or brush? If you haven't, you have homework. This week I want you to find some time to go out and run through brush. Wear blaze orange. It's that time of year, folks. I tend to get caught up in brush. And I've tried to imagine what it would be like to run through the woods with a chandelier on my head. And I'm thinking that it would not improve my gracefulness or ease of motion at all. So I think there's probably a certain point where having a big rack makes running through brush a lot more difficult if you're trying to move at high speed. So again, sexual selection would pick big racks, but there are limits. There's a balancing act because we're talking about an energy expenditure to grow it, to hold it up, to keep it. We're talking about limits to your mobility possibly. You know, with the peahen and the peacock, you know, does this tail limit his mobility? Certainly. I mean, peafowl can fly, but they're a heavy-bodied bird. They're not going to do like high-flying aerials, but chickens can fly, turkeys can fly. They're weak flyers. These guys are weak flyers, but think about how much better he'd fly if he didn't have that stupid tail. This limits his survivability, even though those big, beautiful tails are selected for by sexual selection. So you've got pressure going in two different directions. So that's three kinds of selection. Questions? So this leads us to this idea. And I know this is your last vocabulary word, but I'm doing these in a different order. So I'm trying to weave a story here. Selective pressure is whatever's pushing a species in a particular direction. So selective pressure can come from a variety of sources. In natural selection, it comes from those challenges to survival. That might be a predator. A predator can exert selective pressure on a species. If the predator is fast, you have to be faster. The selective pressure is towards speed. If the predator is a visual hunter, the selective pressure might be towards better camouflage. If we're talking about artificial selection, the selective pressure might be growing muscle tissue faster. Today's chickens have been selected to come to butchering weight in 6 weeks. When I used to raise turkeys. I did a small-scale turkey thing for a couple years. And I did both heritage breeds and the modern broad-breasted white turkeys. The modern broad-breasted whites come to butchering weight in, 13 weeks? For the size of turkeys that my customers wanted, they would come to butchering weight in 12 to 14 weeks. And I would try to aim to have them 11 weeks out, and then I would get a variety of 11 to 15-pound birds. The first year I did it, I didn't realize that, and I ordered my turkeys too early, and I had 35-pound birds. Nobody wants a 35-pound turkey. Nobody. They put on weight really fast. The older varieties of turkeys that haven't been selected for that kind of really fast weight gain, that haven't had selective pressure exerted by humans to gain weight faster, they can take 6 months to come to butchering weight. But the pressure from humans, the selective pressure from humans in terms of turkeys has been for rapid weight gain. Selective pressure can come from the environment. It can come from humans in the case of artificial selection. It can come from potential mates in the case of sexual selection. Whatever is sexy is going to get selected for in this mode of selection. So selective pressure is just what pushes the species in a particular direction. It can come from any place. So selective pressure, again, is what pushes the species, whether that's the environment, humans, or potential mates. It's the thing that is pushing evolution in a particular direction. So here's a question. What happens if there's no pressure? You ever have a day where you wake up with a list of 23 things that you're supposed to accomplish before noon? That's some serious pressure. You're being pushed to get those things done. Conversely, imagine a day where you wake up and there are absolutely no expectations on you. You have no list of things to accomplish. You have nothing on the schedule. You can do whatever you want. You can go wherever you want. You can just kind of drift. So what happens when nothing is pushing the species? That's when we see genetic drift. Genetic drift is all about random chance. This is the hardest concept to understand. So remember that we said that evolution is a change in the distribution of a trait or in the frequency of an allele. So in the case of rabbits, good camouflage is rewarded. The selective pressure is towards better camouflaged, fast bunnies because everybody wants to eat rabbits. Coyotes and foxes and hawks, everything. In the case of bucks, the selective pressure is towards big racks, impressive racks, to get those does. In the case of apples, it's toward juicy, flavorful, sweet apples that humans like to eat. The pressure directs the species in some way, but what if there's no particular advantage to something? So I would like to tell you about, you said I had an advantage. Well, I'm not sure this counts. My pinky fingers. Okay, so we're going to be completely straight with one another here. I know that you're all teenagers, and therefore I know that you all have raging insecurities. And I'm going to lay bare my soul and tell you, because, okay, let's be honest, maybe none of you are doing this, but I spent most of my teenage years obsessing about everything that was wrong with me and deciding that I was really probably some sort of freakish monster who did not deserve to live among other humans. But I'm sure none of you experience that on a daily basis, and I'm happy for you. Yeah, right. So one of the many things about which I obsessed about what a horrible freak of nature I was, and I should be living on my own island without contact with other humans, was my stupid pinky fingers. They're bent. They seriously look like crookneck squash. We grew a lot of crookneck squash when I was a kid, so I had a lot of chances to look at crookneck squash and compare my fingers to them, and my fingers look just like crookneck squash. They're terrible. Clearly, I will never get married. I will never reproduce. Nobody will ever get near me with a 10-foot pole because, oh my God, look at these pinky fingers. They're monstrous. I mean, that was just the tip of the iceberg, let's be honest. But it was one of the many things that I found to obsess about. Okay, seriously, it doesn't matter. There is absolutely, and some of you are probably in my pinky club, it's actually a single gene mutation, and the middle bone of the pinky finger is not rectangular, it's slightly triangular, so the pinky appears bent. Who knew? It's called clinodactyly. But there is no survival advantage to having straight fingers or crooked fingers. No survival advantage whatsoever. Some of you are in my club. So you will not be able to find calories more easily because your fingers are straight or crooked. You will not be able to run faster, jump higher, avoid predators, catch prey, none of that. No natural selection is acting to exert pressure on crooked versus straight pinkies. Now, nobody is breeding humans for crooked versus straight pinkies. Nobody is rounding up all the crooked-fingered humans and saying, you don't get to breed. Nope, no babies for you. There's also, I was very relieved to discover once I got to college, there was no sexual selection pressure on crooked versus straight pinkies. Nobody ever came up to me and said, you know, I was going to ask you out, but then I saw your pinkies. No way. Likewise, nobody ever came up to me and said, oh my God, your pinkies, we must date. Never happened, never, not once. So I never got a date or lost a date because of my crooked pinkies. It seemed to be completely immaterial to everyone I met. It's a whole different thing. So there is no selective pressure, not natural, not artificial, not sexual, on crooked pinkies. What does this mean about the gene that gives me my freakish, monstrous fingers? They're fine. I'm really okay with them now. It means that the allele frequency for this just kind of drifts around. It's totally random. I happen to have crooked pinkies. My daughter has crooked pinkies. My dad had crooked pinkies. That's where I got them. But there's no rhyme or reason to how common crooked pinkies are in a population because there's no pressure whatsoever. It just literally doesn't matter. There's no advantage natural, artificial, or sexual, to having crooked or straight pinkies. Now, in a big population, let's say we've got 10,000 people, and, maybe about half of them are carrying a gene for crooked pinkies. Is it likely that randomly, out of the blue, everybody with crooked pinkies will get hit by lightning?
Yeah.
Out of 10,000 people? That would not be random.
Possible.
If exactly everybody with crooked pinkies gets struck by lightning in a large population, that's unlikely to happen. But what if we had a little teeny tiny population? What if we have like 6 people? 2 of them have crooked pinkies. Is it possible that just randomly, without regard for their pinkies, the 2 with crooked pinkies both get knocked over and killed by a falling tree? Yeah, it is. And then, ba-da! We have no more crooked pinkies in the population. Genetic drift, is a big deal in small populations. This is a huge deal in small populations. It's a big deal in small populations because you can change allele frequencies radically just by accident. You're driving across an island where there are only 10 rabbits. 2 of them happen to have some gene that nobody else has, and you hit them both with your car. You've just radically altered the genetic frequency of whatever that gene was in that population. So genetic drift is all about random chance. It has nothing to do with survival advantage, sexual advantage, what's being selected for by humans. But in a small population, this can change things really fast. Let's talk about founder effect. So, what is a founder? That's a flounder. You can have a flounder who is a founder of an aquatic population, but that would be unusual. So, a founder is someone who starts something. We talk about the founders of the country. We can talk about the founding members of a population, too. So let's say we've got this interesting little bug species here. They occur in green and yellow. No advantage to either color. The gene frequency, the phenotype frequency between the green and the yellow is just sort of fluctuating randomly. But at some point, a couple of them end up getting washed ashore on an island. Maybe they hitch a ride on a log. It floats to the island. We now have these 2 little yellow bugs on the island. Do you think we're going to get green bugs on the island? No. Because the genetics of the modern population are limited by the genetics of the founding population. So because we didn't have any green bugs in the founding population, we're unlikely to suddenly magically get green bugs. Now, it can happen if we've got recessive genes. That's a whole different thing. But the population, the modern population, has its genetics limited by the individual members that founded it. This is a really big deal with islands. It's also a big deal. What if somebody, I don't know, killed all the deer in the entire, eastern U.S., or most of them? Oh, wait, that happened. What if somebody killed, all the beavers in the eastern U.S. except for, 4? Oh, wait, that actually happened. What if somebody killed all of the turkeys in the eastern U.S. except for a small population of 10 or 15? Oh, wait! Yeah, you know the punchline here. It happened! So what we would have would be a genetic bottleneck event. And what would that do to the genetic variability in the modern population? It would limit it based on the genetics of the founding population. It's not founding in the sense of, they arrived on an island, but it's still a founding population in that, for instance, all the deer in Ohio are descended from 10 deer that were restocked here. Those 10 deer represent the founding population of the modern population. So So bottleneck events are another place where we see founder effect because the population that founds the new population after the bottleneck event has got limited genetic variability. So here's the one that everybody thinks they know. Species. Everybody thinks they know that. The most common thing I saw for pre-knowledge was a type of animal. A type of animal. Is that correct? Heck no, of course not. Or I wouldn't be bringing it up. So, number one, species can refer to any living thing. And when we talk about a species, we're talking about a group of living things that share physical appearance, that share physical traits. So, the first way that humans looked at living things and started to try to classify them was just based on appearance, because that's what we had. So I look at these two things. They look pretty similar. They're the same kind of thing. They're the same type of thing. We come up with the concept of species somewhere in the 16th century, 14th century, something like that. And we start naming things. So we were just looking really at physical appearance. But there are some problems with that. So, okay, well, let's look at these guys. Do they all look pretty similar? They all have feathers, they all have 2 wings, they all have legs, they all have a head, they all have some kind of red thing on their head, they all lay eggs, pretty similar. Are there other things that have feathers, 2 wings, 2 legs, lay eggs? Yeah, of course there are. So, broadly they're all birds, but specifically these guys are all chickens. Okay, that's easy. Get rid of that. What is this? It's a horse. Good, you passed your first test. So, 4 legs, fur. What's that? That's a donkey. Now, it's a donkey, but it looks an awful lot like a horse. It looks very similar to a horse. It shares a lot of physical characteristics with the horse. Fur, 4 legs, 2 ears. The ears are shaped similarly. They both have a mane. They both have a tail. They both have hooves. Very similar. Well, the next way that humans defined species was whether or not 2 individuals could mate. So, could mate and wait, here's the catch, produce fertile offspring. So can you breed a horse and a donkey? Yes, you can. What do you get? You get a mule, but mules are not fertile. So, a horse plus a donkey equals a mule. A mule plus a mule equals all the sex they want to have. There ain't going to be no baby. They can keep trying. It's not going to happen. So, we've got 2 different species here. They look similar, but they're not capable of producing fertile offspring. Now, somebody, and I should have given them a prize out of the prize box for it, in the last class said, why not? Why can't mules have babies? That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Because the third part of the definition is that in order to consider 2 individuals part of the same species, they have to share a given percent of DNA, and it's a really big percent. Like in humans, the 2 most different humans you could find on the entire planet share 99.99999% of their DNA. So 0.0001% of DNA is enough to make us as different as we are. So 2 individuals are the same species, share an incredibly high amount of DNA. They have the same number of chromosomes. Horses and donkeys actually may have different numbers of chromosomes. I need to look that up. But a lot of closely related species, one will have 46 chromosomes, one will have 48. Well, then when you have eggs and sperm from the 2 species, they may be able to form an offspring, but that offspring may not have chromosomes that match up correctly, so you can't produce offspring from that infertile hybrid. So, for species, we look at something that's a living thing, so Bacteria, fungus, plants, animals, protists. Viruses are not living things. We don't talk about viral species. Those living things have to share physical traits, physical appearance, physical shape. They have to be able to produce fertile offspring, and they have to share a really high percentage of DNA. Usually we also talk about specific genes that have to be present for it to be considered a member of a species. Questions? So tomorrow you work on level 1, and quiz is Thursday.